Between Gambit, the patch, and the OTA, there have been multiple meta shakeups in the recent few days. Let's take a look at what the new metagame looks like in Marvel Snap. Even though I think the all-in Gambit lists, popularized by Husky Puppies among others, are probably in their process of falling off, they are still the starting spot for what this metagame is. The biggest thing these lists have done is start to meaningfully chase out Sholo and reshape the metagame around things that are good against Gambit, Horseman of Death. This is in part because Gambit Horseman of Death is a new card and very popular and very cool and very strong when he works, but he also has very defined weaknesses. The closest analogy I can think of for Gambit Horseman of Death is actually Shang-Chi in terms of what it tells you to do to beat it being very clear, but it being very, very good against the things that it's very, very good against. It's almost like if they made a Killmonger, a Shang-Chi. That's what the effect this card is having on the metagame is like. If you think of it as if they made those cards and those cards were new, and how would people react to those cards if they came out today, that's a lot of what's going on with Gambit. Which is to say that he has reshaped the metagame largely in his own image, almost independent of how strong he is, just by virtue of being a card like that is newly released and exciting. For what it's worth, my read on Gambit is he's more of an Isca type card than he is a Sholo or Star-Lord type card, but I still think he's pretty good. What really I'm trying to demonstrate with this list is just when you go all in on Gambit, you are putting a lot of pressure on people to do things that don't get affected by Gambit. And that baseline, do things that aren't affected by Gambit, is what this metagame is spiraling off in towards. So baseline, one deck that is really great at dealing with Gambit is Ramp. And I play a lot of this deck. This is one of my favorite decks to play in the entire game of Marvel Snap. What I really like about this deck is that it manages to match a sort of fairly predictable point output, one turn a card kind of thing, while also having cards like Legion and Cosmic Ghost Rider that can really catch opponents, maybe not by surprise, but not necessarily be the thing they're expecting to happen. Those cards give this deck so much life. Like the fact that it is able to be a deck that is playing a bunch of really big bodies, but also actually interact with your opponent in meaningful ways is reminiscent a lot of Aurora. And just by virtue of playing the big bodies, it ends up not immune to Gambit, but the more about Gambit they are, the better the matchup is for you. One Gambit kind of does what two Gambits do in this matchup, which is to say, blow up your 2-cost scalers. It's not like that's bad against you, but if they start prodigying and copying the Gambits, well, that doesn't really help them in any meaningful way. What you're really trying to do is just play a bunch of really big 5s and 6s. You have a lot of ways to make this happen. The ramp cards, of course, and then also cards like Blink will take cards that would be targeted by a Gambit off the board and turn them into something that almost certainly will not. This means that this deck is the easiest one-stop shop answer to anyone who is all-inning Gambit stuff right now. Quick and dirty, simple, will work. Another list in a similar vein is Doom 2099, which I am a pretty strong advocate of for many people watching this channel. This is not just an easy list to play, it's a list that puts a lot of the onus on doing things on your opponent instead of on you. Your job is to concentrate on your game plan and really just sit there and work on your fundamental skills. What do you think your opponent is going to do? What points play do you need in order to match that? The card Doom 2099 is obviously quite good against Gambit type things, but it's also just good in general. There's a lot of decks that are kind of like held back by Gambit right now. And those decks are overwhelmingly like the onboard combo style decks that are really bad to see when you're a Doom 2099 or a ramp deck. Like, these are decks that are fairly limited in terms of their points output. They're going to lose to like a full Invisible Woman combo, but they're gonna beat Gambit stuff. And meanwhile, Gambit is out here turning off the Sholo combos by blowing up their entire board. Gambit is out here blowing up Invisible Woman. It's out here blowing up all of this stuff, right? So those decks, the decks that are actually quite good into this kind of stuff, are on the downswing, And the decks that this deck beats are on the upswing because it's quite good into Gambit decks. This is a very one-note deck. Like, I'm not going to sit here and act like the deck doesn't revolve entirely around Doom 2099. It definitely does. But if you get that Doom 2099 on turn 4 and you also have an Iron Lad to go look for it, there's plenty of stuff. The whole world is effectively your oyster. It's just a very strong deck. I want to also highlight a couple of cards specifically. I don't have a better option than Jack Flag, but I don't like him. And Sandman is just a great way to cover all sorts of stuff. A lot of the Gambit decks are like, we're playing multiple cards on the final turn of the game. This is a card that is extremely good into Sholo stuff as well. And you're basically always playing a 6, no matter what happens on turn 6. I've actually been playing a lot of this list from W. It's a bit of a boomer Sholo list, not just because W is a boomer. Oh, and by the way, tomorrow's video is an interview with W on the Supergiant list that won Golden Gauntlet and is currently a featured set pack. Please make sure to turn in if you're interested in looking at picking up that list. It will be the single best resource that you can find on the deck. I am very sure about that. This is a deck that is looking to accommodate the modern reality of Gambit existing by saying like, okay, look, I'm going to play armor out of respect to Gambit. I'm just happy to do that. I'm not going to be a move deck because a move Sholo deck, like the Batroc type of Sholo deck, is much, much worse at actually putting all of its stuff in the armor lane, A, and B, is much, much worse at accommodating a tech card like armor. There's not as many open spaces in a deck that is as synergy heavy as that, whereas in a deck that is like relatively synergy light, just doing Elsa, Kitty, Angela stuff in what is already functionally the Sholo shell, is much more able to accommodate stuff like armor in order to deal with Gambit. Elsa naturally pushes you towards getting all your cards in one lane anyway. That one lane can be the one that's protected by the armor. And then at the end of the game, you go into other lanes because you have the world's largest Scarlet Spider. That's basically the ethos here. Whatever you're going to be targeting with your Sholo, make sure it's in the armor lane. And that is, I think, it has felt like enough for me, especially against the decks that are like all in gambiting. Like, yeah, I'll lose some stuff, but I can keep the majority of my game plan intact. And if I keep the majority of my game plan intact, it's still really strong. Now, this is probably like, if I had to guess, it's behind the ongoing Sholo list and behind the Batroc Sholo list in terms of total points output. I can see that being a potential problem, and I can see like maybe we end up doing Batroc Sholo with the armor, ongoing Sholo with the armor. All that stuff is like, I can see it happening. Right now, this is the one I'm experienced with. It's the one I've been playing. It's the one I've been succeeding with. I have had shockingly good results with this deck, to, I suppose, nobody's surprised because it's a Sholo list. But I do think that this is an example of like, okay, you can see Gambit's influence here. We are only doing not just the armor in this deck, but this entire conception of what Sholo is. This one lane only until turn 6 version of Sholo. It's only because of Gambit. And maybe it's an overreaction, we'll see, but it's certainly working for me right now. If you asked me with like a threat to my life what the best deck to play to climb right now is, I would say it is probably negative Star-Lord. And the biggest reason for that is it dodges all of the stuff I'm talking about, right? Oh, I'm a Sholo deck. Let me adapt to Gambit. Oh, I'm a Gambit deck. Let me figure out how many Gambits I should be running. Don't care. I have a million energy. Not worrying about it. Don't care. Do not care. You cannot make me care. I refuse to care about the petty squabbles of mortals, right? So negative Star-Lord is just a deck that looks at the things that are happening in the metagame right now and says, oh, I don't care about any of those. I'm going over the top of all of you. Good luck with that. And that is exactly what it does. If you forced me to tell you what I think the best deck in the game is, I suspect it to be something along these lines. I have also been playing plenty of normal Star-Lord recently. I think that that is another really reasonable reaction to Gambit. I mean, frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if Star-Lord was actually my most played deck this season, largely because I was sort of focusing on like, is this the kind of thing that is super beatable? The negative deck feels really interesting to play because it seems very difficult for anyone to ever snap into you unless they are extremely, extremely popping off. Like, you just have a lot of tools that don't even necessarily have to go that long to be realized. And even if you're skipping like 3 turns, they're just looking at you like, I still might be dead here. I don't even know if this is the final form of the deck. Like, there's some adaptations that I've seen that could be pretty interesting. Things like getting a Grandmaster in there. I saw Bullseye Cordy doing that. Like, there's There's cool stuff in this space, and largely I just think that it's just a deck that right now looks at the metagame and says all of the jockeying for positioning these on-board decks are doing, why would I even bother caring about that? Now, what it really, really wants to see is, like, if you think of the metagame as a power struggle between Gambit and Sholo, it wants to see Gambit come out on top because all the Sholo decks have Cosmo, and that gives them a real fighting chance against this that the Gambit decks really don't have a lot of the time. That I don't know is particularly reliable. Like when I was playing the W armor list, obviously it also had Cosmo. There were games, like, I remember one game against this deck where they went in on the Star-Lord thing, and I had a Cosmo in one lane and 2 armors in the other, and they tried to Zola it, and it's just like, all right, they conceded before the card even flipped up. Like it's one of those things where it's like, this deck is really good, but it really wants Gambit to win the fight between it and Sholo because that is much easier prey. In case anyone was wondering, yes, I've still just been playing this version. I'm getting more and more sold on the Black Panther part of it, and less sold on Electro, who I really want to cut, but people keep playing all these one-drops, and it's like, I guess if you're going to be like a Hood Gambit deck, like, all right, you got the Hood, I'm going to blow up Demon, like, I can't cut her. But it does sort of feel like I wish I had a good idea of what could meaningfully add beef to this deck, and I kind of don't. Maybe we're going back to Daredevil. I really don't know. Maybe it's Bruce Banner, just something. I feel like if you want to mess around with it, the Electra spot is the spot I would be doing it with. So what about, like, the cards that actually got changed? Here is Ica's list of Pixie stuff, which is just like a time-honored Ica archetype. He loves playing just Pixie and cards, usually with Infinity Ultron in there. And I think this is a pretty reasonable space to be doing that in because there's just generally a lot of different ways to invest power in things that are bigger than the Gambit threshold while leveraging your own Gambit, and also generally just outputting comparable power to many other mid-range decks with your sort of general scam game plan of Pixie Mobius, but really you kind of just do the Pixie a lot of the time, honestly. This is also a deck that if other people are going to be messing around with Pixie, if people are going to be messing around with Mr. Negative, one of the biggest upsides of being a Pixie deck, and this seems a little bit weird, is that you get to be a Mobius deck when those decks are relevant, right? You don't have to be a Mobius deck when you're playing Pixie, but you get to when people are playing a bunch of, say, other Pixie decks or Mr. Negative. And I think a lot of the time when I want to be playing a Pixie deck, it's when there's some other thing in the metagame that is getting Mobiused a lot. And I am very inclined to point out here that I did just talk about how good Mr. Negative is right now. And I think that this is the kind of thing that's like, if anything's going to start making that deck worse, people doing a bunch of Pixie Mobius stuff is a really good first step. Yes, they are still a Star-Lord deck. They are not doubling that Star-Lord most of the time. They have access to Star-Lord and Zola, but it's not really part of their main game plan, and they're not as good at using it as some other lists are. This means that this kind of stuff still is pretty legitimately good into the Mr. Negative stuff, even with that Star-Lord backup plan. What I love about decks like this is they get to choose. You honestly do not have to play Mobius in this deck, but you have the luxury of doing it and also achieving upside for yourself. And that's when tech cards are at their best, when they are doing multiple things for you. An example would be Enchantress and Sauron decks. It's doing multiple things for you, it gets to be a part of your core, and then you also get additional matchup value. That's how I feel about Mobius in this list, and I think it's just a very solid, largely going to have pretty okay matchups into a wide range of stuff kind of deck. A lot of coverage here. You have, for the onboard combos, of course, you have your Gambit, you have your Cosmic Ghost Rider. For the in-hand combos, you have your Mobius. Lots of stuff going on that is pretty compelling. So as not to step on my video tomorrow with W, this list comes from Derek, and it's a different twist on Supergiant. Instead of playing cards on turn 5, what we're looking to do is curve Supergiant into a full skip with a Magus and Warlock on the board. Our dream turn is basically just that. Any one drop, Magus, Warlock, Supergiant, activate both of them, go get either a Claw or an Iron Man off of the Magus, discount your hand off of the Warlock, and then also just play a gigantic She-Hulk and output a bunch of points, and your final turn is a zillion points, but you are still maintaining the core Supergiant principles of Cosmo and Negasonic after the face-down Sugi. This is a really disruptive strategy, and frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if there were more types of decks that were in this vein. Like when you look at the actual packages in Supergiant, the Ronin package kind of sticks out because it's not something that's good anywhere else, and Ronin is a very big 5, but you're like, okay, why am I actually doing this? Messing around with those spots, or I think more accurately, using cards like Supergiant, Cosmo, and Negasonic to supplement another sub-tier 1 strategy like the Warlock She-Hulk stuff is a very interesting development. And I think it's the kind of thing people should keep in mind. It's not going to work for every one of those strategies, but I do think when I look at it, what I see is something that can consistently raise the floor of things that are efficient points, but not overwhelming amounts of points. When you look at decks that are efficient points right now, there really aren't that many. The Supergiant deck is one of the few efficient non-combo points decks remaining. And so this kind of thing can be the support beam for other efficient non-combo decks. And I think that's mostly the role that it's playing here. This is looking at the sort of Magus Warlock shell with She-Hulk and saying, you need some help keeping combo decks down. We've got you. Supergiant, Cosmo, Negasonic. Suddenly those combo decks have a much bigger problem. And if this ends up being a better package for points than the base Supergiant stuff, it might actually just stick around. Now, there is some naturally awkward RNG in a deck like this. If you draw both 5-drops, your Magus is just staring at you, making you look really stupid. If you don't have the right hits on Warlock, and for the record, Warlock happens before She-Hulk, so you can hit Warlock, you can hit the She-Hulk a bunch with Warlock procs, and it like won't be helpful at all because you're already skipping 5, and so any extra proc beyond 1 into the She-Hulk is just not something you actually want to see. There's definitely some ways that this deck can screw you over, but largely what it's doing is saying, I have a fairly coherent points game plan that specifically fails to go over the top of a lot of things in this metagame. So I'm going to take the mid-range, I don't know, enhancement pill and become a Supergiant Negasonic Cosmo deck, and suddenly I have the ability to drag those combo decks down into the mud. A Pixie Cerebro 3 list from Jaywalla. This is a very reasonable list, in my opinion. What I really like about Pixie Mobius in these decks is just that, like, if you Pixie Mobius, it's pure upside. That's obviously an amazing thing for you, is that you have the ability to mix up your range. One of the biggest problems Cerebro 3 has is predictability. Other than, you know, some of the other obvious problems like locations and things of that nature. What I don't like about this is that it costs you some other cards. Like, I would really like to get a Luke Cage back in here. I'm not as sold on Magus. I am a little less than convinced on some of the specific choices here. And Pixie and Mobius are actually taking up space here. But I do think that largely Pixie Mobius C3 has been honestly a little bit impressive to me. It's just basically pure upside. Like, there's very few situations where that's not going to be helpful to you. Even switching your 1s and your 3s, like, honestly, I don't even know if I want the Valkyrie. I get that it's in here to give you more upside, but just switching your 1s and your 3s, you're already kind of going to be playing those, right? Like, Cerebro 3 is already like, okay, you know, what's the difference if I pay, you know, 3 for a Nightcrawler and 1 for a Cerebro? This is the same. I was going to do that anyway, right? Like, those cards are being played. There's nothing punishing in this Pixie. And so when you do Pixie Mobius, that just gives you 100% upside, but it's not like you're really losing much. You know what I mean? Like, you're not drawing like a 5-cost 1-drop except off the Valkyrie, which is honestly kind of making me wonder if I really want it, right? Like, it's a shockingly interesting combination in this list. Like, I remain compelled by this, even if it's not necessarily going to be the best C3 list, just because of how it gives you more range on the final turn of the game. And Cerebro's normally such an extremely predictable deck that that additional range can be incredibly helpful in beating people who think they know what you're doing. To nobody's surprise, Denish has been in the lab cooking up Hela lists. This is where he's at. It is a Hela list that he finally feels like he has real plans into a lot of different stuff. And I am tempted to agree. The baseline thing going on here is, of course, you want to turn 5 play your Star-Lord into turn 6 MODOK and Hela. That's going to beat a lot of stuff, but you can also do things like play some stats and then turn 5 play your Star-Lord, and then turn 6 You can play Fin Fang Foom and Juggernaut if your opponent has a Stardust down or something like that. You have the ability to deal with a lot of different things. You have a powerful game plan that is supplemented pretty heavily by Star-Lord himself. You even get Star-Lord and Grandmaster. That's a pretty cool thing to be doing right now. A card I specifically want to highlight, though, is Magic, who is a card I have in the past been very down on. I have not been complimentary of Magic. She's often sort of a rug pull magnet. But in a metagame that is so defined temporally right now, Magic has been a very good card quietly for the past few weeks, and now, hopefully, after me saying this loudly. Magic is really good against Star-Lord stuff because you play Magic on 5 and they're like, oh, I did my whole combo. Now I have 8 million energy on 6, but there's still a turn 7 here. Magic is quite good against Supergiant stuff if you can get it down. They often don't really have ways of interacting with this. Their deck is very linear, so if you're able to do any kind of multiplicative scaling, extra time to do that is incredibly valuable, or even just extra time to play a bigger guy and use all your energy and use all your cards, or Supergiant is very built to be efficient. Sholo is another one where it's like this is a deck that is built to be super hyper efficient and complete its quest, so to speak, by turn 6 every time. So they're going to play on turn 5 the thing they want to hit Sholo with. And if there's a turn 6, well, that better be the last turn of the game because otherwise they might not have another target for that Sholo, right? A lot of the time when I'm playing against Magic decks with Sholo, like when I was playing the W deck, right? It was like, okay, well, if I think they have the ability to play a Magic, I am supposed to play Maverick on 5 if I'm afraid they're going to Magic on 5, so that then I can use the Maverick as an alternate Sholo target, and then also, if they do play the Magic, go into a Scarlet Spider. Like, you have to actually seriously consider this. I just wanted to take a moment and say, like, Magic is quite good right now. And maybe that means, maybe there's a bunch of reasons for that. Merlin's way worse. There's a lot less of him is probably the primary, but Legion really only showing up in a couple of decks, also pretty important. Scarlet Witch not being a really playable card right now outside of a couple of very specific instances. There's a lot of uncontested Magic, and this is as good a time for her as I can remember. I think this list is real sick. It's, of course, another modification of the classic Big Baby Agamotto Sholo list. It's just kind of what you play at High Infinite if you want to feel something. Like, it's probably not the best at doing any of this stuff, but I gotta tell you, this deck will make you feel things. You are gonna feel things that you have not felt in Marvel Snap in a very long time. You're gonna feel things like playing Wong and White Tiger and then polymorphing the White Tiger twice on the Wong lane. You're gonna feel things when you play this deck. And I think that this kind of thing where it's just like, here's my pile of cards that I can go multiplicative with. Like, usually you win these kind of games by going multiplicative, but like, I want to specifically call out Gambit here because Gambit is playing a role that drags this deck closer to viability, in my opinion, which is to say, just having the ability to do something really stupid with this card, like Images of Icon it and blow up your opponent's entire board against those small ball decks, is really good, because a lot of what holds a deck like this back, a lot of what holds generally good cards decks back, is that they die to decks that are using small cards in ways that are multiplicatively synergistic. That's what they don't want to see. And this card is very specifically pushback against it. I genuinely cannot get over, like, I really do think the correct comparison for Gambit is something closer to Killmonger or Shang-Chi than it is to, say, Star-Lord or Sholo. That's what this card is. It is a card that sets the terms of debate. In a real way, for the first time in a long time, they have released a tech card. And now, the tech card they have released is defining what's good and what's not. Do you have answers to this? Are you playing outside of the range I hit? This is the Shang-Chi thing. This is the Killmonger thing. Oh, you're seeing a lot of Killmonger. Don't play one drop. You're seeing a lot of Shang-Chi. Play smaller guys that scale up to 9. That kind of stuff, that reaction is what Gambit is causing. And so you're seeing these good cards lists really show up, not like for the first time, but it's been a while. And you're just getting these decks that are like, here's my pile of good cards that's just going to good cards their way through things because the Gambits are policing a lot of the decks that would go over the top of them right now. And that's a really interesting development. Honestly, I feel like this video could be like 10 decks longer, but I really don't want to step on the tier list that I'm going to be doing on Sunday. So let's just stop there and say, this feels really open. Like, this is a really, really, really open metagame. And I also think maybe we'll talk a little bit about Gambit here, which is to say, like, I understand why people hate this guy. Like, it makes perfect sense to me that people don't like having their stuff blown up. It makes perfect sense to me that, like, people would hate a card that's like, what if Shang-Chi was good again, right? Like, totally understand. I do think it is relevant, though, that this guy being released is the thing that's actually making the metagame move for the first time in, like, a month, right? Like, it's the first time where it's like, it's not just about what is my opponent doing. It's about what am I going to do in expectation of that, which is to say, Gambit is less a proactive card and more a reactive one, which is a weird thing to say. But like a lot of what happens when you're doing, say, you know, Star-Lord things is you do your thing and your opponent is like, I'm out because that guy's Mr. Negative. When you're doing Gambit things, it's a little more nebulous. It's like, okay, they're doing Gambit things, but here's how much power I have in 5-drops. What am I going to be able to do to interact with that? What am I able to expect? I don't know. Like, maybe I'm just too tech card pilled, and I appreciate this card on the sort of basis of it gives me like the throwback feeling of 2023 when everyone was playing Silky Smooth because it was just a deck full of things that scaled up to 9 power and made Shang-Chi not a card. Like, maybe that's a lot of why like that kind of feeling is something I haven't felt in a while, and so I'm a little more sympathetic to this guy. I do think he kind of sucks. Like, he's like, if you made me say, you know, where do you want to invest the power budget for the season? It wouldn't be in Gambit. Like, I do think it's a misstep in that sense. But I am weirdly sympathetic to this guy compared to something like Star-Lord, who I just think, like, the play pattern there is just terrible. And so it's like, I don't know. I don't know where I'm at on this guy. I am largely relatively compelled at this point. But I do think that, like, people are thinking about the guy wrong. And they need to start thinking about him as Killmonger. They need to start thinking about him as Shang-Chi. And maybe that's bad, right? Like, maybe there's a reason they did the Techpocalypse, you know? But I do think that once you start thinking about him like that, he becomes way easier to handle. And that's really the message for today. As always, I've been KMBest. You have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.